Just going to try and make this video to discuss oil levels, big ends and wet sumpings, and whether parking the engine at top dead centre when you stop it, getting a piston up near top dead centre when you stop it, has got any merit to it. And I think it probably has, and I'll try and explain here. Now, although this engine's got the Hitchcock's breather conversion with the longer filler neck, they also use a longer dipstick to sort of make up for that. And if the camera's picking it up, we can just see that the low mark on the dipstick is just below the screw hole for the timing cover, but above the oil passageway to the oil feed pump. So the oil, even at its lowest, is above the oil pump. At its highest, it's there, just sort of a little below that idler gear spindle, and probably actually level with the inlet camshaft spindle. So we keep those in mind for a moment, and I'll just take this away and use my hand to point a few things out. So we've got the low mark about there, just above the centre of the crankshaft, and the high mark sort of out here, well above the centre of the crankshaft. And should we stop the engine at top dead centre? Well, yeah, it could solve a lot of trouble, but it would have to be pretty much right at top dead centre if you've got the oil level anywhere above the halfway mark between the two lines on the stick, because the crank pin, the 90mm stroke, that gives us a radius of 4.5 centimetres, which isn't a great deal. That's where your crank pin would be. So if you've got the oil level anywhere near the high mark, even at top dead centre, it might be possible for some oil in the tank compartment to be at or slightly above the level of the crank pin. If you combine that with perhaps having a roller big end fitted, a roller big end will let a lot more oil through than a plain big end will, by nature of the rollers and there being round and never probably closing the oil holes off in the crank pin fully. And I say holes, in a roller big end you've usually got two oil holes coming out into the big end, whereas with a plain one you've got one, albeit slightly larger hole. But the close fit of a plain big end bush would probably slow down any oil migrating from the oil tank into the crankcase in such a manner. But yes, stop the engine and get it at top dead centre, but unless you're very near it, if your oil level is above the halfway mark on the dipstick, it's probably not going to make a lot of difference, because oil could still migrate through past the crank pin and get into the crankcase. I just thought I'd make this short clip because it's something that crops up from time to time, and has done recently as a topic that I've been discussing with someone, and I thought this might be the ideal opportunity to sort of show where the oil levels actually are in the tank section relative to where the crank pin might be. And the other thing is, the oil pumps themselves, if I'm right, I think they operate at something like 1/12 of the engine rotational speed. So for every 12 turns of the crankshaft, I think you get one of the oil pump spindle. Now that gives you 12 chances of having the engine at top dead centre and having the oil pump discs and plungers parked at different positions of their rotation. And among those 12, there may well be certain points where the oil holes are sort of uncovered or stopped in such a manner that oil can pass through from the tank and get past the pump and straight through the oil ways and into the crankshaft end feed as well, possibly. So there's all those things to consider, which perhaps maybe don't always come to mind when these wet sumping issues are being considered. But I just thought that might be one worthwhile thing to bear in mind. And also, the seal in the end of the crank needs to be good, and where fitted, the seal behind the timing pinion also needs to be good. And that lot together might just certainly reduce any tendencies to wet sumping if it can be achieved. So I thought it was a short clip worth making that might help some people with wet sumping issues.